Pastikan kita semua cemerlang bersama. Saling menghargai, saling berbudi, satu tradisi. Akademik dan anak terpuji, seimbangkan dunia. Bukan berbadu, berwarna cinta yang sama. Lautlah segera. Ayo cemerlang bersama dengan semangat membara. UPSI Indonesia bersama. Cemerlang bersama dengan semangat membara. UPSI Indonesia bersama. Ini suara kita semua mendengar setia. Jadi terpatri, gak terrajuni, mesti mendirikan negara. Ayo cemerlang bersama dengan semangat membara. UPSI Indonesia bersama. Cemerlang bersama dengan semangat membara. UPSI Indonesia bersama. I love UPSI. You love UPSI. We love UPSI. I love UPSI.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good evening everyone. Apa khabar semua? How are you?
Khabar baik, Doktor.
Khabar baik.
I hope that we are all doing well and continue to take care ourselves. Stay home, stay safe. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Muhammad Ikhwan bin Saad, a lecturer from Biology Department, Faculty of Science and Mathematics, University Pendidikan Sultan Idris. Today, I will be serving as your MC and moderator. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this Global Webinar Education Series. 2021 is the inauguration year for the Global Webinar Education Series, organized by Faculty of Science and Mathematics, University Pendidikan Sultan Idris. As COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing, the usual face-to-face training workshop and courses are now have to be conducted 100% online, mostly through webinar. Of course, the biggest advantage of this mode of knowledge sharing is the fact that organizing such a session has a little implication on finances, but very big on global participation. So far, we have 101 participants who are currently online who come from several places around the globe. The primary purpose of this webinar series is to present topics that are relevant, informative, and hopefully engaging to others. As University Pendidikan Sultan Idris niche area is on education, we think that a webinar series on education is an excellent platform for establishing itself as an authority that is referred, respected, and stay relevant. In the future, we have speakers from within the outside the institution to share their expertise relating to enhancing education. Thus, the webinar can also be a platform for networking. To learn more about the organizer, let's just take about 2 minutes to watch Faculty of Science and Mathematics Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris corporate video. Let's watch. Thank you very much for watching. Ladies and gentlemen, today's global webinar education series topic is on how to write a good problem statement for an educational research proposal. Our speaker today is Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda Rahman from the Department of Physics, Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Malaysia. About Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda, she began her professional journey since 1989 as a secondary school teacher and currently as an educator of prospective physics teachers since joining Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris in 1997. She firmly believes that as an educator, we should strive to educate, motivate, and inspire our students to be the best version of themselves. According to her, teaching is to touch life forever. She received her PhD in Physics Education from Victoria University of Manchester, United Kingdom. Master of Science in Physics from University of Missouri at Kansas City, USA, and Bachelor of Science in Physics from Kansas State University, USA. She received her diploma in education, specializing in physics and science education from University Technology Malaysia. She has conducted hundreds of face-to-face training workshops and courses locally and internationally. Now, through the webinar series, the knowledge sharing can now reach more participants globally. Ladies and gentlemen, before the presentation begins, let me inform you that how the presentation will be conducted. First, Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda will present her talk on how to write a good problem statement for approximately an hour. After that, there will be about half an hour of question and answer session and followed by conclusion. Now allow me to welcome the speaker, Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda, to deliver her presentation. The floor is yours. Welcome, Dr. Nurulhuda.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ikhwan, for that introduction. Thank you so much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good day to all the participants that are online today. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope that you can take away something useful, some knowledge, some understanding that would be useful for your research. Okay, so let's just sharing. Okay, Muhammad Akimi, can you stop sharing there? Okay, can everybody access to the screen? Can you see the slides there?
Yes.
Yes, you can see the screen.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so you can have access to my slides, Genially slides, if you scan the QR code there, so you can have access to it, okay? Or else the session here will be recorded, so we will upload it to Faculty of Science and Mathematics website so that you can download it from there if you wish to listen further, okay? All right, let's go to our main topic here, how to write a good problem statement, okay? Problem statement is the heart of the research, okay? So you need to get it right at the very beginning before your research even started, okay? So you have to know what is it that you need to include in writing a good problem statement, because usually students who are postgraduate students, okay, who are doing their masters or PhD, or even the undergraduate students who are doing their project, final year project, okay, this is where they usually have that's lacking. They're always lacking in terms of writing a good problem statement. So I hope that from today's webinars, you can actually take away something that would be very useful to your research, okay? Let's see, let's start. Now, what is a research problem? So very quickly, we are focusing on problem statement, but before that, let's just, review what is a research problem. Now, according to WISA 2008, it's very simple. It is a situation that needs a solution and for which there are possible solutions, okay? So if you have a problem that needs a solution, but there are no possible solution, then you cannot use that as your research problem. Okay, so a solution that needs a situation that needs a solution, and for which there are possible solutions. So there are more than one solution. Okay, right. So that's very quickly on what is a research problem. Now, this is our main topic. What is a problem statement, right? So it is a concise and succinct statement about the problem that the research wants to address. It needs to be concise and succinct, right? So what is a problem statement? But when you write the problem statement, okay, when you need to write it down for your proposal, there are actually 6 components to writing a problem statement, right? Okay, so you have the first component is the ideal situation, okay? what should be happening in the education scenario, in the field that you are trying to investigate? What should be happening? What is the ideal situation? Okay, and then what is the justification for it being ideal? Right, so you have to write something about why is it that is the ideal situation, and perhaps you need to include some citation saying that that is needs to be happening. Okay, so I'm giving you some examples here. For example, let's say in the current Malaysian education scenario, right? The Ministry of Education is very much encouraging teachers to teach using this STEM approach. Okay, teach science, mathematics, engineering, and also, of course, technology using the STEM approach. What do I mean by STEM approach? It is an approach whereby you integrate engineering practices, engineering design process, science practices, science content, right? Mathematical thinking. You integrate all these three to actually develop a technology that can solve a real world problem. Okay, so that would be what it means by STEM approach. Okay, STEM approach is where you integrate the engineering practices, engineering processes, science practices, science content, right? The mathematical thinking, you integrate all those to develop a technology as a solution to a problem, real world problem. Okay, so that would be the ideal. Okay, ideally, the Ministry of Education wish that the teacher can actually conduct such lesson. Okay, so you say something like that. Okay, and then you want to justify it. You might want to cite a official document, for example, the curriculum, the DSKP document, the official document for the curriculum in Malaysia, right? You might cite something from there saying that this encouragement is actually there, okay, actually exists, right? Okay, so that would be the ideal situation. Now, when you go into the current situation or the status quo, you know, there is something, however, okay, you might want to start the second paragraph with however. However, there is something lacking about, you know, about this situation here. You want this, ideally, you want this to happen, but what is actually happening on the ground? Okay? What is lacking, right? And you justify, you cite specific figures, you give citations as evidence that there is this lacking, right? That what is actually happening is not what should be happening, okay? So that would be the current situation. So for example, in the STEM education approach example, you might say something like, but however, because the STEM approach is quite a recent development in the Malaysian education scenario, most of the teachers or many teachers are not yet well equipped, okay, to actually conduct a lesson using the approach. Okay, so you might want to have a citation there from perhaps previously published paper, for example. Okay, and then you might say, but one of the ways to actually help the teacher is to have them, you know, is to have to conduct, for example, training, okay, in-service teacher training, for example. Okay, so you might want to cite, you know, who said that it is good to actually train the teachers using that kind of method. Okay, and then or you might want to, you know, provide resources, for example. Okay, resources that the teacher can refer to for them to be able to conduct such lesson. Okay, so that would be something that can be done because of this lacking, because there is sorry because there's lacking in terms of the current situation is not, you know, yet according to the ideal situation, therefore, you know, what is the good thing that we can do about it? All right. So you can say something like, perhaps we can provide resources for the teachers for them to refer to, right? Okay. So when you go into research gap, okay. So however, in terms of, so for the research gap part, you need to look at the literature and see what other researchers have done about this problem. Okay, about the problem that the teacher is lacking in terms of the skill to actually implement a STEM approach, and you know what others have done about it. So you need to go into the literature and read so that you can have a general idea about what is happening in this field, in the problem that you want to investigate. Okay, so research gap. So in the current situation, you are stating the problem, but in the research gap is where you look at the previous research and see whether anybody have done anything about it. Okay, so research gap, let's look at research gap, can be any one or a combination of the following. Okay, you can say the gap is because there is lack of research in the area, for example. Okay, you can say that perhaps there are contradictory or inconclusive findings from previous research. Okay, so depending on the problem that you highlight in your current situation, okay, you might want to go into the research gap saying that, okay, that's lack of research. This is quite a recent development. So not much research is being done in this area, therefore I'm doing it now. Okay, so that would be the research gap. Because you need to know what is lacking in terms of the research that has been done, okay? The area that has not yet been explored or underexplored. Okay, so that would be the research gap, right? So you can say that there's a lack of research in the area, or you can say there's contradictory or inconclusive findings from previous research, or you can say you're proposing an alternative approach in carrying out the research. Perhaps the field has already been carried out by many researchers, right? But you are trying to propose a new approach. Okay, for example, all this while many research have been done in this area, but mostly the research use quantitative approach, for example. Okay, but now you are proposing the qualitative approach, and then you have to justify why yours is perhaps better or is an alternative to what has been done so far. Okay, and then also alternative, or you're proposing an alternative or better research design. For example, before this, the approach is quantitative approach, but the design is mostly survey design, for example. So now yours, you want to do some, for example, correlational design or experimental design, or you want to propose ex post facto design, causal comparative design. So you would say something like that in your research gap. Okay. Another way of stating research gap is saying that a not fully addressed need that calls for designing an alternative, new or innovative way of treatment, of intervention, a new product or innovative product, or even if you're doing your PhD, perhaps you are proposing a new way of thinking about something. Okay, all this while people are thinking about something along the line of just one perspective. So you want to propose a different way of thinking. Okay, so that would be the gap also. All right. So if you're saying something like, for example, if you're saying that, okay, problem-based learning is actually already researched by many researchers, okay? So what is new about doing problem-based learning, for example? Okay, so you might have some new way of, there's a twist there to that problem-based learning that is the usual way of doing. Yes, so you might want to say something like, you are going to put problem-solving strategy explicitly together with doing problem-based learning, for example. Okay, so that's the innovative way of treatment that you are going to bring in for your proposed research. Okay, and then also research gap can be you are proposing alternative or better method of data analysis. For example, the data analysis usually uses the descriptive statistic, the usual ones, percentage, mean, standard deviation, or even, inferential statistic, for example, the t-test. But let's say you're proposing to develop a model. So you want to use a new way of analyzing the data. Perhaps you want to use the, what do you call it? The SEM. A way of analyzing, because it's more rigorous, for example. So you have to justify why you are saying that your proposal is a better method of data analysis as opposed to what has usually been done. Okay, so that would also account for research gap. Okay, and the next one is different demographic setting. For example, you might say something like, okay, this research has been, many researchers have been done in this area of study, but they are usually done in the Western country. Okay, there's still lack of research done in the Southeast Asia, for example. Okay, so that can also be called research gap. Okay, different demographic settings, right? And the last one is updating or augmenting previous research. Okay, so perhaps previous research let's say there has been many experimental research done in this area that you want to investigate, because experimental research usually can just cater for a small number of participants. Okay, not like survey research. In survey research, you can have hundreds of participants. But if you're doing experimental research, the respondent is usually a very small number. Okay, so. And then, of course, perhaps because it's small number, it's very contextualized in nature, even though you can actually generalize to the population, but the population perhaps is a small population and the sample is very small. So if you have a finding, it might not be generalizable to, the bigger population, for example. So you are doing it again, you're replicating perhaps the same thing, but it can augment or it can actually update, because some of the experimental research, perhaps it is very much influenced by the context, by the time, okay, the year, for example. So it might give you a different findings if you're doing it, for example, before COVID-19 and then, while pandemic, you might get a different findings if you're using, even though you're doing the same experimental design. So it's updating, augmenting previous research. So these can be used. Any one of these or a combination of these can be your research gap. Okay. So what is it again? Research gap. Sorry, research gap. The area that has not yet been explored or underexplored. Right. So if you are proposing alternative approach, perhaps that is not yet been explored or it's underexplored. If you're proposing a different research design, yes, perhaps others have used different research design, but this one is not yet explored fully, for example. So that would be research gap. So, okay, right. So next one, let's look at what are the strategies that you can use to fill the research gap. Right. So there are several strategies that you can use to fill the research gap. So basically, research gap is your research is should be able to fill in, okay, fully or perhaps partly the gap that is the research gap. Okay. So what are the strategies to fill the research gap? The first one, you can develop a new instrument, for example, or a new product. Okay, that can cater for the gap here. Okay, the gap whereby a not fully addressed need that calls for designing a new way of thinking, a new treatment, a new product, for example. Okay, so how to fill the gap? You develop a new instrument, for example. You develop a new product in general. Okay. And then the second strategy is you apply a well-established theory or framework or concept in one area to your area of study. Perhaps that theory or that framework or that concept have been extensively applied in a certain area of study in the literature, but not so much in your area of study. Okay, so that is one way to fill the gap. Okay. Develop a new concept, idea, or solution. Okay, a new concept, a new way of thinking that would satisfy again satisfy a not fully addressed need that calls for a new way of thinking, for example. Okay, all right. And then the next one is generate and improve more comprehensive or unambiguous definition of terminology. So this is one area of research that you can do actually. It's very conceptual in nature. Okay, so for example, when you read the literature, you can see the trend that certain terminology has many different meaning, and also sometimes many different label to it. Okay, so there's no one label and there's no one definition of the terminology, for example. So you want to do research so that you can generate. So this is very fundamental in nature. Okay, so if you're doing PhD, you can do this, right? You can generate and improve more comprehensive or unambiguous definition of certain terminology in your area. Okay, okay. Right, so that is another way to fill the research gap. Okay, and the next one is using the same framework of past research, but explaining the findings using a different theory. Okay, so this is also very theoretical in nature. Okay, you might want to use the same framework of past research, but you do something to in your research design so that you can actually explain your finding using a different theory. Okay, use an alternative or different approach, design, sampling, data analysis. Okay, that one is to cater for all these gaps in terms of proposing alternative or better approach, alternative or better design, alternative or better method of data analysis. Okay, so the strategy would be to use different approach, different design, different sampling. If the gap is in terms of the different demographic setting, right? Different analysis or different instrument, for example. Okay. And the next one is use of triangulation. This can also be one of the strategy to fill the research gap, right? So perhaps that's funding there. But the way that the researcher do is perhaps just one method. Now you're proposing, you are doing the same thing, but you're proposing that you want to use triangulation. You want to use other methods, or you want to triangulate it with different way of analyzing the data, for example. Okay, so that would be also one of the strategy to fill the research gap. Okay. And the last one is add a variable to a framework or use a different variable. Okay, so the same framework, but you add mediator variable, for example, or moderator variable that was not done by the previous research. Okay, or use different variable. For example, most of the research that have been done in your area investigated achievement, for example. Okay, not so much the motivation, the affective component is not well researched, for example. So you use different variable for the same framework. Okay, so that is one. These are the strategies to fill the research gap. Okay, fill the research gap. Right. Okay, let's move on. Okay, we only have about half an hour left. Okay, so that would be the research gap. That would be the third component of writing a problem statement. Okay? The next one is write the consequences of ignoring the problem. What happens if you do nothing about the problem? write it in your problem statement. Okay, so you can say something like, you know, that this will lead to ineffective practice, or this will lead to limited way of thinking, or, you know, the policy will be flawed or will be outdated, for example. Okay, say something about what happens if you do not address the problem. Okay? And then the fifth one is, what happens if you address the problem? Okay, so basically this is stating the significance of the research. What is it that you can contribute? If you do the research, what is it that you can contribute? So contribution can be practical in nature, right? Practical in nature, sorry. Okay, in what practical way will the research benefit the stakeholders? Who will feel the consequences? So say something in your problem statement. Okay, if you are developing something, who will feel the consequences? Does the problem have wider relevance? Can the similar issues be found in other contexts? Okay, so that would be practical contribution. So if you're developing a module, for example, the module itself can be a practical contribution in the sense that the module, if available, if you make it accessible to teachers, okay, the teacher can have it as a reference, okay, for their day-to-day teaching and learning. Okay, for example, that would be practical contribution. You might also want to say in terms of theory. Okay, so if you're doing your PhD or you're doing your Master's Mode A, fully research, you need to have some theoretical contribution in your proposal. Okay, how will resolving the problem advance understanding of the topic? In what way? In terms of knowledge. Okay, in terms of knowledge, what kind of knowledge can you contribute to the literature? Okay, so if you're doing your PhD, if you're doing your Master's Mode A, you need to have that theoretical contribution, not just practical. So if you're developing a module, fine, you have the module. That would be practical contribution, not yet theoretical contribution. How can your module contribute to knowledge? Okay, so perhaps you say something like, you know, the step way that you specify in your thesis, and then can be a guide, yeah, for other researchers, for example. Okay, so does the problem has their direct or indirect consequences for the society, for the researchers, for example? What benefits will it have for future research? So you need to think along the line of these questions here, in terms of what is it that you can contribute, your findings can contribute towards the literature. Okay, right? And perhaps you contribute policy. If you're doing a research on policy, you know, after the significance of the consequences of addressing the problem would be, for example, you successfully generated a policy that can be applied, that can be used by, you know, certain stakeholders, for example. So you need to say that in your problem statement. Okay. And the sixth component of a problem statement is the proposed solution. Okay, proposed solution. So what is the solution? And when you write the proposed solution, there are other things that you need to write in that paragraph. Okay, let's look at the proposed solution in detail. Okay. So basically, the proposed solution is, the first one is you state the purpose of the research, the purpose of your research. Okay. So for example, if you're trying to develop a STEM approach activity, teaching and learning activity, so you would say something like, okay, thus, you know, the research will, okay, develop something like that. So that would be the purpose of the research in the component, the proposed solution. Okay, but you need to include all these. Okay, the research design. Okay, in stating the purpose of your research, you need to state the research design. Okay, so you can select designs from either quantitative approach, qualitative approach, mixed methods, or perhaps developmental approach. Okay, so when I talk about design, this is what I mean. Okay, of course, when you read the literature, you would see some of the authors refer designs as approach. Some say design as methods, research method. Okay, so I like to say that quantitative is basically approach, because under approach you have under it, okay, the approach is a bigger concept, and under approach is the design. Okay, so for example, quantitative research approach design, for example, you have the survey design, correlational design, experimental design, causal comparative, or ex post factor design. Okay, so these are designs, research designs under the quantitative research approach. Okay, so survey design has descriptive power, it can describe, but it can only describe something about the sample, in fact, and not even can be generalized to the population, because it does not use the inferential statistic. Okay, basically it is only descriptive in nature. Okay, correlational research design is descriptive and also at the same time predictive in nature. Okay, so if you're using, for example, what kind of analysis that you can use, Pearson correlation, for example, and then I forgot about that, analysis whereby you can actually predict, okay, which of the variable has a power, or how much each of the independent variable has impact on the has impact on the dependent variable, for example. Okay, so correlational research design has descriptive and at the same time has predictive power. Okay, experimental design is basically cause and effect, so it has explanatory power. You can explain something, okay, why this is happening, what are the variables that impact or affect certain variable. Okay, causal comparative, ex post factor has both predictive and also explanatory power. Okay, so if you are using qualitative research approach, you need to specify the design. For example, you're using phenomenology or ethnography or grounded theory or historical narrative, case study. These are all designs under qualitative research approach. Okay, mixed method. Now, if you're using Creswell's idea, okay, Creswell in 2013, there are 6 designs under mixed methods approach. Okay, convergent parallel design, exploratory sequential, explanatory sequential, intervention, transformative, multi-phase. Some of the researchers I know, they have different views about mixed method research design. They say that if you are using mixed methods research design, you need to specify which of the quantitative approach design is you are going to adopt, and which of the qualitative research approach designs you are going to adopt. For example, let's say you're using mixed method, and you say that for the quantitative approach part, the design is survey, and for the qualitative research approach, you're using, for example, I don't know, case study, something like that. Okay, so you need to specify for each approach which of the designs that you're going to be adapting or adopting. Okay, but if you go with Creswell's idea, the mixed method research designs, there are 6 there are 6 designs under mixed method research design. Okay, and then of course you have the next approach, which is the design and or developmental research. Okay, you have developmental research. So basically, if you're developing something, for example, you're developing a module, you're developing a kit, you're developing software, for example, your design would be under developmental research design. Okay, so you have here, for example, design and developmental research. You know, acronym DDR. This is by Klein and Ritchie. Okay, so you would have the specific steps on how to do DDR. So you need to declare you're doing DDR, for example. Okay, or you can go with design-based research. This is by Brown and also Collin at the same time, right? Have some similarities, but also some differences between design-based research and DDR, okay, design and developmental research. This is what usually happens for undergraduates final year project. They use a simplified version. They use developmental research using RD model, for example. Okay, so RD model is actually initially is instructional model. Okay, but it's very useful in the sense that many other activities that is developmental in nature also uses the RD model. Okay, so not just for instructional purposes or teaching and learning purposes. Okay. Now, other designs that cannot be neatly subsumed under the different approach here is action research. Okay, action research is research that is being done by a practitioner himself or herself. Okay, so it's quite distinct from the other research design. Okay, right? So research design, you need to put that in your proposed solution paragraph. Okay, and then you need also to include the population who are involved. So you need to say something like, for example, okay, all the science teachers, the population is all science teachers in Peninsular Malaysia, for example. Okay, so that would be your population. Okay, and geographical location. Okay, so just now, all science teachers in the population, the geographical location will be Peninsular Malaysia. Okay, so that's an example. And then the variables of interest, you also put in your variable of interest. For example, you are trying to investigate the correlation between the achievement and the attitudes towards learning physics, for example. So you put that in your proposed solution. Of course, you state that when you state the purpose of your research. Okay, so variables of interest, can be all these. These are ways to categorize variables or data, we call it, right? So you can have nominal variable or nominal data. For example, the gender, race, color, city, those are nominal. Okay, just naming. Okay, ordinal, usually students measure attitude or perceptions, and you have that Likert scale from 1 to 5. So that would be ordinal. Okay, so 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. So you have order ranking there. Okay, so that would be ordinal. Interval, for example, IQ is interval data. That's not true, 0 point. Even if you give an IQ test to a respondent and the respondent has 0 marks, doesn't mean that the respondent has 0 IQ. So interval data has no true 0 point. Okay, ratio has unique, non-arbitrary 0 point. So for example, if you say the height is 0 centimeter, meaning that there is no height at all. Okay, all right, so that would be the types of data. You need to mention these types of variable, the data or variables in your proposed solution paragraph. Okay. Alternative classification of types of data or variable, you can go with categorical, which is actually synonymous with nominal data. Continuous is actually including interval and ratio data. Dichotomous is 2 category ordinal data. For example, you can either be sick or healthy, guilty or innocent, false or true. So something like this. Okay. So you need to mention your variable in your proposed solution, right? In your proposed solution. Okay. How many minutes do I have? Okay. All right. Now, to further enhance your understanding, let's look at several examples of problem statement. I hope that you can analyze it with me, all right, and see whether you have, perhaps you might not understood some of the things that I've said just now. Try to apply it, okay, in the problem statement that I'm going to show you, okay. And if you have further questions, we have perhaps if we have a little bit of time after this, you can ask your question, okay. So I have 4 examples of problem statement, right? Let's look at the first one. This is a survey research. The title is Analyzing Training Needs. analyzing training needs, right, of in-service teachers to foster HOTS in science teaching, to foster higher order thinking skill in science teaching. So the research basically analyzed what are the training needs for teachers so that they can foster higher order thinking skills in teaching science. Okay, so let's look at the problem statement. All right, so if you remember just now, there are 6 components to writing a problem statement. The first is you need to state ideal situation. Okay, so for example here, remember the title, Analyzing Training Needs. Okay, drastic reshaping of the education system since 2011 to produce science higher order thinkers. Okay, so because you are analyzing the training needs for fostering HOTS, you know, you zoom in and don't think about anything else, zoom into the higher order thinking. Okay, so drastic reshaping of the education system since 2011 to produce science higher order thinkers calls for a significant change in the teaching profession through instructional improvement. Okay, so professional development in the form of in-service training model. Okay, so you zoom in into training because you are analyzing training needs. Okay, so professional development in the form of in-service training model is said to be the most cost-effective, efficient, and systematic measure. So you need to cite somebody here. You know, you claim something that is, you know, very good. You need to cite, right? So Amir, 1993. To bring change not only to teachers' belief and attitude, but also teachers' classroom practices. Okay, so you have here a situation whereby the Ministry of Education encourage teachers to produce higher order thinkers rather than just students who can regurgitate, you know, facts from your teaching. Okay, so we want students to be able to think, right, at the higher order level, for example. So what can we do? Okay, what can we do? We can actually, one of the things that we can do is to train the teachers themselves so that they can foster these higher order thinking skills in students. Okay, and one of the ways to do it is to do in-service training. Okay, to do in-service training for teachers. According to Amir, that is one of the good ways to do it. Okay, so thus in-service training should be systematically organized and implemented to successfully support this reform. Okay, to ensure a training program delivers the desired results, it has to be designed based on empirically tested model of good design that takes into account all aspects of the training program, including the needs assessment. Can you see that? This assessment here? The title of the research is Analyzing Training Needs. So, you know, see, this assessment here is brought forward. Literature indicates that one of the determinant factors for successful in-service training is the involvement of the participants itself in the need assessment process, as they are the main link to student learning and outcome. Okay, this is ideal situation. Okay, need assessment of teachers is positively related to motivation and commitment, which afford presumption of active participation of teachers, as well as the success of the in-service training, according to Miller and co-authors. Thus, educational administrators must conduct, you see that? Must conduct needs assessment and analyze the needs in their planning prior to designing a training program. So this is the ideal situation. If you want to conduct, if you want to organize a training program, you need to take into account what your participant actually needs. What is it that they want to take away from a training program? So you need to do needs assessment. Okay, so this is the ideal situation. And then you go into the current situation. Now, prior to 2009, okay, so this is actually stating all the needs assessment exercises that have been done so far by the Ministry of Education. so that when the reader reads this part of the problem statement, the reader is convinced that, you know, the proposal has taken into account what is already been done in this area. When you say that there's a problem here, so what is it that has been done? Okay, so prior to 2009, with reference to Malaysia Public Sector Human Resource Training Policy 2005, insistence of identifying training needs of participants does exist. But the utilization of training needs assessment of the participant was not specifically mentioned. Okay, so there's a problem here. There's a lacking here. All right. The trend of organization and decision makers determining the in-service program design was still prevailing. In 2009, Teachers Training Division was bestowed the responsibility of coordinating and disbursing allocation for all trainings under Ministry of Education Malaysia. Okay, and then you have that guide for training prepared by the Teachers Training Division in 2010, and then we already have the first nationwide survey, and so on and so forth here. Okay, the components were covered in a very broad and general manner. Okay, there has been some needs assessment there, but it is very broad, and general, whereby in terms of what we're looking for higher order thinking skills needs, okay, fostering higher order thinking skill, whereby only 2 items refers to fostering higher order thinking skills, okay. So, it goes on here, and then trends of the science teachers training needs was focused on improving their ability and role as traditional teachers, okay, as the provider of knowledge, not as a teacher that can foster higher order thinking skills. So you can see that argument here shows that there is something lacking here in terms of the needs assessment that has been carried out so far. Okay, so here you go into the research gap. Okay, so the research gap, how is it different from the current situation? The research gap is you need to look into the literature on what others have been done, about the same problem. Okay, so however, there is no evidence of research undertaken that specifically addresses the needs of teachers to foster higher order thinking skills in science teaching. So that would be the research gap then. Okay, developing a training program without a solid basis will almost always result in a waste of valuable resources. Now, this is the not do assessment, for example, and then you just organize a training session for fostering higher order thinking, for example. This is what going to be happening, right? So a lot of Ministry of Education has actually conducted a lot of training programs for teachers across the country. Okay, but do you see any significant differences in terms of how the teacher conduct the lesson, okay, on the ground? You see any significant differences? You go to school, the common scenario would be the teacher at the front of the class, and then the students sitting in rows, and they're listening to the teacher explaining things to them. It's the same scenario, same as 50 years ago, right? Okay, so result in a waste of valuable resources. To ensure a training program delivers the desired result, it has to be designed based on an empirically tested model of good design that takes into account all aspects of the training program, including the needs assessment. Okay, so we are trying to promote why our research in terms of needs assessment is a significant thing to do. It's an important thing to do. Okay, the needs assessment data can be used as part of the guideline on the planning of training programs for teachers on fostering higher order thinking. So that will be the consequence of addressing the problem. Okay, and the last paragraph is a solution. Therefore, this survey study, can you see, survey is the design. Okay, attempts to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment from the perspective of teachers. That will be the purpose of the research on fostering course in teaching science, to decide on what the science teachers need to be trained. Okay, science teachers teaching the middle school in mainstream school, that will be the population. Okay, across Peninsular Malaysia, that would be the geographical location. Will be sampled. Okay, the finding of this research can be utilized as the basis for designing training programs at all levels of the in-service education. You see that? That would be the proposed solution. Okay, so this is an example of a problem statement that has all the 6 components in it. Right? So how are we doing time? Oh, okay, so since you are short on time, okay, you can have access to this. You can look at the examples here. I'm just going to into just one more before I end my talk. Okay, so this is sorry, let's go back. This is a developmental research using RD model, and the title of the research is Development of Engineering Infused Physics Lessons on selected topics that are aligned with the new science curriculum. Development of engineering infused physics lesson. Okay, so this would be the ideal situation. The Ministry of Education Malaysia demand the curriculum, the new curriculum demand that science, technology, engineering, mathematics be part of a student's education. Okay, so in science classes, a lesson using the STEM approach should integrate according to Huling and how do I pronounce that? Okay, so some of the benefits of the STEM approach that are gleaned from the literature. This is according to Bybee. Okay, enhance ability to apply knowledge and understanding in real world context. So when you raise the issue of the STEM approach can actually enhance students' ability to apply knowledge and understanding, make sure your research will cater for that. You need to measure how they apply knowledge in real world context, because you raise this issue here. Okay, that would be the ideal situation, and this is the current situation. Okay, there's something lacking in, if you want to be at the level of the ideal situation, there are something lacking here. So here you see that, for example, component that is truly lacking is engineering, SK, SSM, and the STEM approach are recent development. Many teachers are not yet well equipped with the knowledge and skills to design and implement engineering infused lesson according to INI. And then according to Vilya, teachers are having difficulty in providing engineering activities, even though the students are excited about it. Okay, so engineering and technology that require a particular skill cause teachers to feel reluctant to run them. So these are what's lacking. Okay, what is the current situation? Last but not least is the issue that teachers perceive as constraints in STEM implementation is time management. Due to limited time allocation, some of the projects are held outside the school hours, and therefore the teachers feel that it's not so important to actually assess student work. That would be the current. Okay, so one of the measures to support the initiative is sharpening teacher skill and abilities to teach, and how to do that. And one of the strategies to sharpen is to provide exemplary STEM teaching and learning resources. Okay, because you are trying to develop resources, so you have to raise that issue here. Okay, so research gap here is, however, there is a lack of appropriate and meaningful tested resources. So that will be the research gap. Okay. Consequently, the call for increased engagement in lessons that apply the STEM approach may not be realized. That would be the consequence of ignoring the problem. Okay. So the Ministry of Education Malaysia, in collaboration with other agencies, are developing. They do develop, right? But all are project-based time, and thus usually take longer time to complete and require a lot of out-of-classroom learning time on the part of the students and the teacher. Okay, so these would be the research gap evidence. Okay, we do have some publication in terms of the resources, but very limited, and most are project-based that students need to have more time in doing it, and then they would use out-of-class learning time, and so on and so forth. Okay, so thus, this would be the proposed solution. Thus, this research will design and develop engineering infused physics lesson on selected physics topics that are aligned with the new KSSM. Okay. Now, the topic is not specified because why? Because the topic selected will depend on the data from needs assessment exercise. Okay. So you need to specify that. If, for example, you specify the topic that you want to develop the teaching and learning activities, then you have to justify why you select the topic. For example, you want to develop something on kinematics, or you want something on heat, for example. So in your proposed solution, you need to justify why you want to develop on that particular topic. So here, it doesn't say specifically what the topic is all about, but you justify here by saying that the topic selected will depend on the data from needs assessment exercise. Okay, so to emphasize the engineering component in a STEM lesson, we advocate physics lesson that systematically infuse engineering, okay, and so on and so forth. So this would be the proposed solution. Okay, and then that is the final paragraph is the consequence of addressing the problem. Okay, consequence of addressing the problem. All right. Okay, so you can have look at all the other problem statement. For example, this is an experimental research. All right, experimental research. Experimenting on problem-based learning and see the effect of problem-based learning on students' achievement. Okay, so you can see all this red showing the components of the problem statement. Okay, this comes from a published research actually, and I have added something to it so that it clearly shows the 6 components in a problem statement. Okay, okay. Okay, so there are figures here. It would be the current situation. You know, you need to actually convince your reader the problem existed. Therefore, you need to have your facts and figures in your current situation paragraph. Okay, paragraph here. You have all the figures there, right? Okay. All right. I think since time is already 3:55 and we only have about 20 minutes for the 15 minutes for the question and answer. So I'm opening I think I stop here, okay, and I pass back to Dr. Ikhwan for our question and answer session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda, for giving us such informative and interesting presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 15 minutes left for the question and answer session. I invite perhaps 3 or 4 questions from the audience. You can either ask your question verbally or you can enter your question in the chat box. Okay, Dr. Nurul, we have here we have 2 questions from the chat box. The first one is come from Jagadisan Vera Chandran. Okay. Good day, Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda. Thanks for the great sharing for so far. My question are, based on your experience and also with the current research trend, what are the research gaps mainly preferred for PhD students?
All right. Okay, thank you so much for the question, but that is so broad. The question is actually a very broad question. It's because when you do research, you have a very limited area that you are expert on, okay? Because when you do research, you cannot do a very broad area and then, you know, your research will not be completed, okay? So, the only one who know the gap in the area is the expert in the area. Okay, so if you want to find out what are the research gap for your research, you need to read a lot. I tell you, you need to read a lot. Or you can discuss with your supervisor if what you're doing is in line with your supervisor's expertise, then your supervisor definitely will know what is the gap in that research area. Okay, so that you need to discuss that with your supervisor. Okay, assuming you are doing research that your supervisor has expertise on. Sometimes students do not do research that their supervisor has expertise on. It's perhaps you might want that's not your area that you are interested in to research. So you propose a slightly different area than what your supervisor is expert on. So in that case, you need to read a lot on your own and see what is it that there is the gap that you can fill in, that you can actually investigate so that you can contribute to the literature. Okay, so that will be my general answer to that question. Okay, so in my area, I'm doing now is a STEM approach. Okay, so I'm trying to develop resources for science teachers, physics teachers in particular, because I know that what has been published by the Ministry of Education, very little, okay, because they cater for all the subjects in the curriculum. So, you know, I'm looking at just physics. Now, so far, what I've found that only 2 topics, were developed by the Ministry of Education in terms of the resources, the lesson plan, the slides for the teachers, the student worksheet for the students. Only 2. Okay, so there is a lot of there's a big gap. Okay, for example, there is a big gap that new researchers can actually fill in that gap by providing all these ideas about what kind of activities that students can do in the classroom, not so big, so that the teacher might not be able to do it because they got discouraged because of the time factor, right? So, in what way can you what kind of activity can you develop so that the teachers might want to implement it in their classroom, because it doesn't take so much time, so much extra time. Okay, so that is my area of research. So the gap there is the lacking of the resources there. Okay, so in terms of research gap, only you and your supervisor would know what would be the gap in that area of your research. Okay, or perhaps you can actually talk to or discuss it with other, for example, your colleagues or other researchers that in the area that you want to investigate. Then they would perhaps know what would be the gap in the research that you want to propose. Okay, right? Okay, another question.
Okay, second one, Doctor. The question is, which research design has more weightage with the current trend of research? Which research design?
I can safely say that the mixed methods research design is on the rise. I can safely say that. Okay, because why? Because mixed method research design leverages the strengths of the quantitative approach designs and also the qualitative approach designs. Okay, so the strengths from the quantitative part and also from the qualitative part, you can actually mix them, and hopefully your research is a better versions of if the research is being done on just one approach, for example. Okay, so it is on the rise. Okay, it started in the 80s, I think, early 80s. If you read the literature, that's one article that shows the graph. It actually expanded exponentially from when it first started around early 80s. Mixed method. Okay, so but pay particular attention on if you're using mixed method research design. Okay, because as I said just now, there are 2 perspectives on mixed method research design. One is using that Creswell research design, where there are 6, okay? And the other perspective is if you're using mixed method, you need to specify what is the design under the quantitative approach and what is the design that you'll be doing under the qualitative approach. So, and then you mix them together, okay? And then you have to say how you mix them together, right? So because some researchers actually it's not very receptive in terms of that Creswell design, so you need to actually discuss with your supervisor and make sure your examiner, okay, have the same perspective as your supervisor, or else you're going to fail that research proposal, or hopefully at the level of proposal, not at the level of viva. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. The third question, Doctor, from Nurulhuda Arifin. Can we integrate the DDR with the AD model for development or module?
Yeah, good question. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. How? Now, first you need to examine the steps in doing DDR according to client enrichee, okay? Go to client enrichee article and see how they explain how you can carry out research using the DDR design, research design, okay? And then because under DDR, you have there are three phases, okay? So you have the needs assessment, the initial phase whereby you need to actually carry out needs assessment. Okay, so if you're developing module and if you say you are using DDR, the first step is to survey your target audience, whether they want such module, okay? Do you need this module? That would be the question that you need to ask your target audience. Do you need a module on this? And then when they say yes, and then okay, that is one of the justification for developing the module. And then of course you have to have other items, say asking them what is the format that they want, what is it that they want to be included in the module. Okay, so that will be your data for that needs assessment part of DDR. So where is ADI in DDR? It is in the design and the developmental part. Okay, so the developmental part of DDR, you put the ADI there. Okay, so because in ADI, the analyzing part is not so much the needs assessment of the target audience. It is analyzing, for example, if you're developing module, it is analyzing the topic that you want to include, you know, what kind of teaching strategy or teaching method that you want to use when developing your RPH, for example, your lesson plan, for example, okay, let's say the module is on teaching and learning. So are you using inquiry for your the phases of teaching? Are you going to use the 4-phase model or the 5E model? So that would be under development at the whole DDR, the developmental phase. But in developing the module itself, you are going to use the ADI model, for example. Okay, and if you're using DDR, the final phase of DDR is the evaluation part, whereby you need to have formative evaluation and summative evaluation. Formative evaluation is basically determining the validity of your module, for example, determining the usability, for example, okay, the reliability if you're doing that, okay, and then what about the summative evaluation part? Is the effect of the module. So if you're doing developmental research and using DDR, make sure that you have that summative evaluation included in your research activity. So you need to determine the impact on, for example, the achievement of the students, for example, on their thinking skill, if your variable is thinking, right? So that will be the summative evaluation part of DDR, okay? So, you know, so evaluation under ADI can also be evaluation in terms of the formative evaluation and summative evaluation, okay? The ADI, and the E at the end there, it can also be evaluation in terms of the formative, the validity, reliability, all those, and also the summative part, which is the impact or the effect, okay, on some certain variables. All right? Okay? All right. So do we have more time for another question?
Okay, another question.
Maybe
Verbally question.
Assalamualaikum.
Okay, Dr. Termizi.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. One final question, okay?
One final question. Okay. First thing first, thank you, Dr. Nurul, for the knowledge sharing. And I think it's very highly beneficial for all of us as an audience to learn many new things from your presentation. My question is related to the type of the research gap. Can you go to the slide of the type of the research gap?
Research gap.
Yeah. Okay, it's very interesting for me to learn that we can see the research gap from the different perspective, just like what you showed us in the slide.
Right.
My question is, you mentioned to us just now that we can use the different combinations of the research gap in order for us to justify our research gap as a whole.
Yes.
But in your opinion, is there any priority or is there any gold standard or rules of thumb that must be in the elements of the research gap as you showed it to us in this slide? Which one it should be the priority, or which one is the compulsory to have in the research gap
Right.
criteria?
Right.
Thank you.
I think, okay, thank you for the question. I think it depends, okay? It depends on the area of the research that you're trying to investigate. Okay? Perhaps there's a critical need for something in that area, and that gap would be significantly needed to be filled in, for example. So only the researcher, only the supervisor, only the researcher, for example, you need to, I tell you, you need to read a lot in order for you to be able to know where is the gap and whether that gap is significant enough to be researched, or it's not so significant, you can just ignore it and nothing bad will happen, for example. All right, you might want to say something about the gap, and then when you go into what is the consequence of ignoring the gap, nothing. It's okay. You don't have to research that. So that's why you need to have all these 6. Okay. So if you ignore the gap, what will happen? Nothing happen. Nothing of significance happen. Okay. So so it depends. It depends on the area of the research that you're doing. Okay, so if it's in my area, for example, my area of research when I did my PhD was in misconceptions. Okay, meaning that I identify misconception as it happened during a classroom teaching and learning, and I see how the teacher actually addresses that misconception. So until now, actually, that's the strategy to actually address. So if you look at misconception research area, you do not there's no gap there in terms of categorizing and listing students' misconception. You have those. There's a lot of research and a lot of resources that actually list down students' misconception. So if you're doing research and you're doing, okay, I want to identify student misconception, okay, there's no gap there already, okay? It's exhaustive already, okay? But there's a gap in terms of how to address. How can you help teachers to address students' misconception in the classroom? Because misconception is a very strongly held conception that students are they're very confident of the idea but the idea is actually wrong. Okay, so it's very difficult to overcome misconception during everyday teaching and learning. Okay, it calls for a special way of doing things. There's still a gap there on how to actually address misconception during teaching and learning. So only the researcher who have done their homework, read a lot in that area, only then that you can identify the research gap. Or you can, of course, if the area is your supervisor's area, then your supervisor would know what are the gap there that you can actually contribute. All right? Okay?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nurul.
All right? Okay. In a minute.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Nurul, for the clearly explanation. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that we are almost out of time. If you have further question for Associate Professor Dr. Nurulhuda, you can contact her through her website at the link will given through the chat box here. You can see the link.
Kejap saya keluar. Stop this.
Okay, the link will be given through the chat box here. Before I close the global webinar education series, I would like to summarize and conclude today's presentation. As we know, a problem statement is the heart of a research. It is the nucleus that drives the entire function of the study. In writing a problem statement, ensure that you have all the 6 components: the ideal situation, the current situation, the research gap, the consequence of ignoring and addressing the problem, and the last but not least, the solution. Ladies and gentlemen, At this webinar series, we will strive to ensure that it will continue indefinitely and hope that you join us again for our next episode for Anything Education. For participants who would like to receive the e-certificate, you need to fill the attendance form through the link provided. Already? I would like to thank again to the speaker for the informative and interesting presentation and all the participants for the very active participation. Finally, we have a photo session. Please switch on your video function now. Okay. Okay, please on your video function now. All right. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thanks. Thank you all, and I, on behalf of Faculty of Science and Mathematics, hope to see you again in our next session. Stay home, stay safe. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Nurul. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tamizi.
Thank you so much. See you again. Bye.
See you in the next session.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.